In this video, we will build our own smart materials in 3ds Max and VRay. For this, we will use a procedural shader setup, which we will layer in multiple compounds and then use an OSL script to control and customize selected inputs. So in this video, I will show you how I built what I call a smart material, and I did that here in 3ds Max and in this case VRay, but it should also work with any other renderer in 3ds Max. So what is a smart material? Basically, I just have here a very simple setup. You can see I have a shader here and I have a few settings. And with those settings, I'm able to control how my shader look like. For example, I can change the color. In this case here, I prepared this scratched metal, so I'm able to define where these scratches appear. For example, I can grow that, or I can also shrink that. I also have another controller here for the inner mask. So now I only have some very defined scratches here on the edges, and we can grow this here again. And then I also have some controls to break up here the shape of these scratches. You can see we have these uneven patches here. So if I don't want that, I can also remove that. You can see we have now these very even scratches on the edges. Let's expand this here again. Let's mix in more of the noise again so that we now have these more random chipped off edges in here. And now what I'm also able to do is to even load some texture map. And I'm just going to pipe that here in my settings node. And this one is now adding some overall scratches here on my entire shader. And I have our own setting to blend this. For example, I can increase the opacity here. And then we have much more overall scratches, only a little bit of paint here left. If I want to, I can also decrease this so that I only have these very subtle scratches here overall. So this is what I call a smart material. So it's basically a very simple setup that allows you to procedurally control here a very complex entire shader just through a few simple settings. And that's what I'm going to show you in this tutorial in here. As always, you can find all of my scene files and resources over on my Patreon, together with a whole course on car rendering and lots of other additional goodies. So check that out if that's interesting for you. Otherwise, let's just set this up from scratch and see how the process goes. So let's first start by building a procedural mask, and this mask will be responsible to assign two different shaders here on our model. You can see we have this kind of yellow painted material, then we have this silver scratch material, and for this we have to build a procedural mask first. So in order to visualize this mask, I just have this simple VRay light material. Let me just assign that here to my model, and now we can just go inside here, and let's just start with a simple composite node. And then in this composite node, we can then start with a VRay dirt, for example. And now we have some ambient occlusion that's happening. We want to flip these two colors because everything that's white will be masked out. So let's just decrease the radius here a little bit. And then I think we have some mask, which is basically masking out here the occluded parts of our model. So we can use this here for a start. And then let's just hide this layer and add a new layer. And for this, let's also put a VRay dirt inside. And in this VRay dirt, in the layer 2, we also want to flip these two colors. And we want to put the radius also to 1. And let's just use here the inner occlusion. You can see then we have a different kind of ambient occlusion here, which is masking out the creases. So let's just put this one here to 0.5. You can see we have a smaller effect then, which I think looks better. Now we can combine both of them by just putting this one here on screen and just putting the opacity back here to 100. You can see then we have both of them combined. So now we have something that's masking out parts of our model, but I think it looks a little bit too perfect for now. So let's try to break that up. Let's just add a new layer in here. Let's just go inside and add a new, let's say, standard 3ds Max noise in here. And then in this noise, let's go in and change the size to 2.5. And then let's go in and increase the contrast to 0.6 and 0.4 for the highs and lows. Let's just also go and choose fractal, and then maybe 10 levels here to get more detail going on. And now in our composite, we can then go in and just multiply this here on top of our existing mask. You can see that will break up here the mask a little bit. So now let me hide this temporarily because I want to add another new layer. Then inside here, let's also put a simple 3ds Max noise. And then this one, we're going to be putting here to turbulence and a size of 2 and maybe also 10 levels, I think. So we have a different kind of noise. And then this one we also want to put on multiply. And you can see now if we have both of them here appearing together, we have kind of like broken up our mask here quite a lot. So now because of those noise overlays, our mask here is quite subtle. So let's change that. Let's just reduce here the opacity to 80%. So it's breaking this up more subtle. And now let's go in and just increase the contrast a lot. For this, let's just move this over. Let's first add here a simple color correction node. Let's just place this inside here. And then in the color correction, let's just boost here the RGB to 5 times the amount. So we have much stronger effect here now happening. And I also want to increase the contrast. So I don't really want to have these kind of like smooth transitions here because it should be looking like some scratched off parts. So we don't really have this kind of like very smooth transitions. So for this, I want to add a simple output node, and let's put this in between. And then in the output node, let's first of all clamp here the output so that we don't have any brighter values than 1. And then let's just add 2 simple points in here. And let's just move this one to 0 and then this one to 1. And let's just move them closer together to maybe something like this in here. So that we have really a very strong mask here that's happening and not these kind of like very smooth transitions anymore. So now I just went in and cleaned up the node graph a little bit and renamed all of the different nodes. Now we're ready to pack all of the nodes which are responsible for our mask, so all of those ones, into something that 3ds Max calls a compound. And this basically just groups them under one node. So once I click this, you can see all of those now are here in this compound. And if you double click on this, you can then see we have all of the nodes here in our compound. And I can just go out by just pressing on the exit button. And then I'm basically out again. So let's just go inside. And you can see that our last node in the chain, the output node where we increase the contrast, is now piped into something that's called a texture map output. And basically every compound needs to have at least one texture map output. You can also have multiple outputs. So for example, let's just go in here, the color correction. And let's just also define this one here as an output by just using the export as output parameter option in here. So then once we put this in here, we go up one level. You can see that there's now a new output here also from this mask. So that's how we can define outputs. Let's just delete this because we don't need this. But apart from outputs, we can also define our own custom inputs in here. So this is where it gets interesting because it then allows us to branch off various of our parameters as input nodes. And by this, we're able to feed some parameters here from outside into the compound. Then inside the compound, those will be compiled here and just generate one texture output. So let's just go in, and everything that has here this kind of small box, we're able to branch off as an input parameter. So let's just take here the radius of our outer occlusion, define this as an input, the radius of our inner occlusion, define this as an input. And then let's also here in our composite, let's use the masks here for the different noises and define this one as input parameters. So the mask here for the noise 1 and 2. And I want to also here in our composite add a new layer. And this one I want to use as an overall mask for everything where we're able to pipe in the texture map. So for the empty layer 5, I will define this one here to set it to screen so that if we pipe a black and white texture map inside, it will be screened on top of our existing network. And then let's just go in and basically branch this one here off as an input parameter for the texture map. And also the alpha, let's also just break this off here as an additional input so that we can define the blending here of our texture map. So now I just went in and cleaned it up a little bit, and I just also renamed here all of the inputs and outputs. You can do this by just right-clicking here, rename, then you can define your custom name, because this will later on then show up here. So we go up one level as the inputs and also as the outputs. Let's also rename this one in here. Let's call this here mask edges. Okay, and so like this, we generated our first smart mask where we have multiple inputs here that we feed into our mask. Then inside the mask, those will be compiled here by this node network that we set up. And then we will get one output, which is accessible here. So something is being fed in and we get one output. So now as a next step, we can use the smart mask in order to blend two different shaders together and then compile everything into one big smart material. So now I went ahead already and prepared two different shaders that I want to blend. So at the moment we just have this dummy shader here applied, but I prepared this base material. Let me just assign this. You can see this is just this yellow coated metal. And then I have a scratched metal version here. And as you can see, this is just a metallic material with lots of scratches. And then I blend both of them here with a VRay blend material. If I assign this at the moment, nothing really happens because the blend mode here is set to black color. So the scratches are not really being used and we have to use a mask in order to blend them in. So for this, we can then use our compound output, just connect this here into the blend amount. And once I do this, you can see I have now this kind of nice blend here between the two different shaders going on. We don't really need our black dummy shader anymore. And this one here is now the material that we're gonna continue to work on with. So at the moment, we just have a compound that's only responsible for our masking effects, but I also want to be able to control various other parts of our shader, for example, the color here. And for this, let's just package all of this here into another compound. So once we do this, we can see we have this superior compound. If we enter this one, we have here our different shaders and the compound mask. And then inside here, we have all of the masks that we set up earlier. So let's go up one level. And now we have to define our inputs and outputs. So this one here should be the output. And then we have to, for example, choose the diffuse color here of our shader and just define this one here as an input. And then we also have to pipe through all of those parameters here from our mask in order that they are accessible here in our superior compound. Let's just do that. Let's just expose all of them here. And now if I go into my superior compound, you can see that we have access to all of those values in here. So now you can see that even we don't really have any inputs here connected so far, we still have this yellow color, for example. We still have some scratches that appear on the edges. And the reason for that is that because we don't have any inputs here connected, all of the values that we set up here in our network are being used. But once we start to connect something here into our compound, then this will be overwritten by this. And I can show you this. I have here this scratch texture. And once I pipe this, for example, here in my overall mask, you can see that now immediately this one here will be applied at the appropriate place. And once I disconnect this again, then it's basically not being used anymore. Let's just connect this for now, because now we can also go inside our compound again and further enhance this shader. So what we're missing at the moment is any kind of bump separation here between our yellow painted metal and our scratch metal. That's what I want to change now. So you can see if I go to a normal pass, they're on the same level. And for this, we can use our mask again. So let's just connect our mask into a VRay color to bump node. And then let's connect this then into a VRay bump material and connect our blend material into the base material and then connect this here to our output. So once I do this, you can see we have now the kind of effect that we're after. At the moment, it just seems to be inverted. So let's just make this here a -1. You can see then those parts here are exposed. Let's make this maybe -0.1. And then the effect is going to be much more subtle. So now that this looks good, let's go in our superior compound material. And now let's just see how we can control those input parameters here in the most smartest and easiest way. If we check out here our superior compound material, you will see that all of those, they only allow texture map inputs, even though some of them, for example, the mask here and so on, they would just be controlled by simple numeric values, like a value of 5 or a value of 10 and so on. And some of those, for example, the diffuse or the mask overalls, this one requires some RGB values, or in this case, even some texture map. So the way these compounds here are set up by 3ds Max is not really smart because it basically forces you to just pipe in texture maps. But there's an easy trick how you can basically make this still work. So you can see for the diffuse map, for example, we could just easily create a simple VRay color. And then once we pipe this into our diffuse, you can see now we're able to adjust here different kind of color values in here. And once I disconnect this again, you will see that shader will jump back to orange because that's how we set it up in the compound. And if we don't have anything connected, the values that we set up in the compound will be kind of set as the default values. The same is true here for our outer and inner mask. We dialed in some settings already, that's why they show up. But once we would connect something inside here, then those values would be used. We could even, for example, just switch this one here to gray and just put this to a pure white color. And then basically now our RGB multiplier can act as a numeric value. For example, if we choose here a value of 5, and then we just connect this to our outer mask, you can see that this is now changing, because like this, it would be just if I set the value of 5 into the radius of our outer mask. So as said, you can control all of those values here, either with texture maps or with VRay colors if you need some numeric values or some RGB values. But I want to create a little bit nicer setup, contrary to just connecting lots of different VRay colors into here. I wanted to use an OSL shader to allow me to dial in numbers directly or pipe in color values. So what I did is that I just used ChatGPT to generate me a simple OSL script, which you can also find on my Patreon if you're interested. And let's now just load the script by just loading any kind of OSL node. Let's use this one, for example. Then up here, you can change your script. So let's just load the script which ChatGPT gave me. And you can see it's very simple. It has various kind of input parameters, various kind of output parameters. But contrary here to our compound, we now have here the option to just dial in, for example, a color directly, to dial in some numeric values, and to also pipe in texture maps. So let's just pipe the color overall into the diffuse here. You can see as soon as I do this, then the color will be taken. Let's here choose, for example, our orange color again. And we can now outside also choose any kind of different color that we wanted to. Now you can see the default values here for the outer and inner mask are 0. So once I connect those, our mask or scratches will disappear. But as soon as I change the values here for the outer mask and also for the inner mask, you can see that I'm then able to control how far the mask is stretching out. Let's make this very big. And you can see you can also control that. Let's just undo this. And now let's connect also our noises. And by default, those values here are also set to 0. So you can see we have no noise at all. But once I increase that, for example, let's make stronger noise, and also here for the noise too, you can see that it then will break up here our mask. Let's put this to 1 for both of them. And then I think this looks much better. So now we still have this texture map. We can then feed this in our mask overall slot. And so far nothing happens because we still need to connect here our mask overall to the shader. Let's also do the same for the opacity. And then you can see our additional texture map also shows up now. With the opacity, we can then define how strong it shows up. So I think like this, it would be a little bit more subtle, and we could make it even more subtle. All right, so I think like this, it looks perfect. We have these nice exposed edges and then also some overall scratches here on top. So I think like this, we can kind of finalize our scratched metal shader here. So now we build our smart material where we have this compound here. We control it with this settings OSL shader. And now if we wanted to, we can just create a library out of this so that whenever we need a scratched metal, we can easily just summon that in our scene. So for this, we can just select here our compound, right click, add to material library. Let's make a new library, save it. And you can see now it's here in this material library. And whenever I need this kind of shader here again, I can then just summon it in my scene. and can just assign it to the objects that I wanted to. I can easily change the color, I can change here these scratches, and so on. And you wouldn't need to rebuild this entire node network anymore. Like this, you can just easily build a material library for some effects or shader that you frequently use and kind of optimize your workflow like this way. All right, so this concludes this tutorial. I hope you learned something from it. If you did, subscribe to this channel. And also, if you want, you can support me on my Patreon, where you can have access to all of my scene files and also can watch a whole course on car rendering and get lots of other additional goodies. Otherwise, see you next tutorial. Take care and see you soon.